Hello everybody, so today we are going to look at bite-sized biology for the blood and the circulatory system. So there's quite a few main questions going on here. Like, you could be asked to draw the heart, a label diagram of the heart, a vein, an artery, the description of the events of the heartbeat, to compare and contrast, your white blood cells and your red blood cells, to state the components and their functions of blood, two circuits and their advantages, definitions. Pulse and blood pressure come up quite frequently. Obviously, you should be able to link this to the respiratory and digestive systems, and you should be able to state how exercise and diet affect the heart. In addition to that, there is also a second experiment, and that's the dissection of the heart. So we'll get started there. Starting off, this is coming up in 2020, so there is no marking scheme for us as of yes for this video. So we'll do our best to answer it without looking at the marking schemes. So first, you're asked, why is the blood on the right hand side of the heart kept separate from the blood in the left? Well, there's two reasons here. I said to maintain high blood pressure, but you could also say, and I'm just going off past marking schemes, you could also say to separate out the oxygen rich side and the oxygen poor side. Okay, so two reasons. They only seem to look for one. I said to maintain high blood pressure, but there is a second one there too. In relation to the heartbeat, what is meant by the term the diastole? And basically what that means is the atria and the ventricles are relaxed, meaning the valves are closed. Answer the following in relation to an investigation you carried out in the terms of dissecting a sheep's heart. So how did you identify the right hand side of that from the left hand side of the heart? Well, the left hand side of the heart is thicker than the right hand side due to the cardiac muscle being thicker. So that's what I have for part I there. Next, on which surface of the heart did you observe the coronary artery? Now this is a little bit confusing because there are 6 different surfaces technically for the heart if you studied biology to a very high degree. But what I think they are really referring to there now is the front surface, which is known as the ventral surface. That's where the coronary artery would be located. The dorsal is the back. So really they only ever really look at the front or the back, and even then it's more of a pre-paper question really. Do not be putting in dorsal is in the back, just give one answer, okay, and that's the ventral. I only put in the dorsal is the back just for comparison, that's all. But the ventral surface, it's possible they might have a different answer for this marking schemes. I don't think they will, but just to be aware of that one. Part 3, describe how you dissected the heart to identify the bicuspid valve. Lots of students get this one not wrong, but just they don't get full marks. Okay, you cut an X, this most students will say, they cut an X shape on the left hand ventral side. You didn't need to say left hand ventral side, but you should have just said left hand side of the heart. Okay, it had to be left because it was bicuspid. Okay, and a lot of students forget to say what they used to cut, to make that cut, and it was a scalpel. So please guys, when you're writing up a description how you dissected a certain part, okay, make sure you say what you did and how you did it, and the how being the scalpel. Now, in addition to that, you would have had to use tweezers to lift up the flaps, and to locate the bicuspid valve, it's located between the left atria and the left ventricle. So that's really important. I would mention all of that there, guys. I can't think of anything else to say. So you use a scalpel to cut an X on the left hand side. You then use your tweezers to lift up the flaps to expose the valve, which is located between the left atria and the left ventricle. IV. State the precise location of one semi-lunar valve and describe how you further dissected the heart to locate this valve. Well, you made the incision at the base of the pulmonary artery. Okay, so the base of the pulmonary artery. And again, marking schemes can vary here. Before, they used to accept pulmonary artery, and some marking schemes will look for the base or the bottom of the pulmonary artery. So to ensure that you get full marks, just say the base of the pulmonary artery. And that was cut in the shape of an X, very similar to up above, using a scalpel. I can't think of anything else you had to say. They're only looking for one semilunar valve, so you know the pulmonary artery is one of them, and the aorta is the second one. Okay, 2019, and this was more on about the blood. So some typical human red blood cells are shown below. They are disc-shaped. What is the name to give those faces, that donut type of shape there? It's bioconcave, everybody. That's just something you learn off. And it's bioconcave to maximise the surface area so that they can carry as much oxygen as possible. Part B. Red blood cells are wider than some capillaries. What feature of red blood cells allows them to pass through the narrow capillaries? Now, this was a very good question. Had to get students to think. Well, these red blood cells here, they're flexible. And because they're flexible, it allows them to pass through the really narrow capillaries. Name the molecule in red blood cells, RBCs, that carries oxygen. Hemoglobin. You should know that one, really. Human red blood cells live for 120 days, approximately. Give a reason for this based on the composition of these cells. So this was a new question as well, and your answer for that is they cannot repair themselves, and the reason being is they do not have a nucleus. And finally, for E, or not finally, I should say, give a location in the body where red blood cells are produced. Now, don't get het up too much on this. You can say the bone marrow. Some people will specifically refer to the red bone marrow or even the yellow bone marrow. It doesn't matter, as long as you refer to the bone marrow. And where red blood cells usually broken down? The liver. Finally, red blood cells are transported in the blood plasma. Name the transport fluid in humans that does not contain red blood cells. So your transport fluid there has to be lymph. 2018, Part A. Blood acts as a medium in the human body. Name two substances other than food and water that are transported in the blood. Well, just go straight to the gases, everybody. Oxygen and carbon dioxide. Give a location in the body where each of the substances enters the blood. So for oxygen, it enters the blood in the alveoli in the lungs. And for carbon dioxide, it enters the blood by means of respiration in the body cells. We refer to that in the excretion chapter. Part B. Draw a diagram to show the human heart and associated blood vessels, labelling each of the following here. So pretty much everything. So again, my diagrams aren't great, so I'm just going to use a digital diagram, and you can see it here. It's a diagram that you do need to know off by heart, really. And I do have notes on my website there that tell you how to go about drawing the heart that you could follow. Okay, state the precise location and describe the role of the SA node. And then they will ask you the location and describe the role of the AV node. I really like this question. So the SA node, everybody, is in the top wall of the right atria. Now, the SA node is also known as the pacemaker. And be careful with this. Some students will write down the right atrium, and this may or may not get the marks. You should really say the wall of the right atria, and the top wall to be a bit more precise. And you can see the pacemaker is up here. Marking schemes vary on this one, but if you say the top wall in the right atria, you will get full marks. Finally, its function. It generates an impulse which causes the atria, that's both atrias, to contract. And when it causes them to contract, it forces blood through the bicuspid valves, tricuspid valve, into the ventricles. You're then asked the story with the AV node. Where is it located? It is located in the septum between the right atria and the right ventricle. So it's located around here. Okay. Its function is to generate an impulse which causes the ventricles to contract. So when these contract here, it forces blood out through the pulmonary artery and the aorta, forcing the semilunar valves to open. So your SA node and your AV node. Next, what exactly has been measured when a person's blood pressure is taken? So exactly what's been measured is the force of blood against the artery wall, and it's always got to do with arteries. So the force of blood against the artery wall. We often have, the new Apple Watches and Samsung Watches and stuff like that can measure blood pressure for us nowadays. Okay, 2016, you were asked to draw a large label diagram of a transverse section and a longitudinal section of a human vein. Okay, so you had to specify which was your transverse section, which is over here, and which was your longitudinal section, which is over here. For your transverse section, really you should just be saying it has a wide lumen and a thin wall. You don't need to go any more in detail there with collagen and so forth. For a longitudinal section, everybody, again the thin wall should be present, but you should also make sure that you have valves present. You will not be able to see the valves in the transverse section, but you can see it in the longitudinal section. Now, 2016A Part 2, that was a tricky question, and a lot of students would have found this difficult. In each of the following cases, you are to name a vein. Okay, so I suppose that's kind of the key there, really, isn't it? That it's a vein that we're dealing with, okay, which fits the description. So I've written the answers next to it. What transports blood out of the muscle, the cardiac muscle of the heart? So specifically out of the muscle of the heart, and that's the coronary vein. It is the coronary artery that supplies blood to the heart, the muscle of the heart, I should say, and that's on the ventral side, right next to the aorta. What brings blood away from the kidneys? That's the renal vein. What carries very little carbon dioxide? Okay, that was a tricky enough one, and that was the pulmonary vein. What brings blood into the right atria? The vena cava, which is also a vein. Remember, veins bring blood to the heart. Arteries, A for away from the heart. What's the capillaries at both ends? The hepatic portal vein, which you'll see in the digestive system, but it also obviously is referenced in the circulatory system too. So a very good question. And part 3 was even tough as well. Briefly describe how blood is moved through veins. So we know through arteries they're going in terms of spurts because there's a pressure there on us due to the heart. But what about the veins? Well, veins move blood by contracting and squeezing. Okay, which forces the blood onwards, and it only forces them lightly. So therefore veins need valves, V for valves, V for veins, to prevent the backflow of blood. And if you were ever asked what's the function of any valve in the body, it is always the same function to prevent the backflow of blood. Doesn't matter what name it has. So yeah, that's why when we often say we want to increase our circulation around the body and so forth, that we have to move, or we have to stretch, or something along those lines, because we want the heat, which has been transported in the blood, in the veins and arteries, to be able to move. So a particularly good question, but quite tough at the same time. Okay, let's move on. This has got to do with the pulse rate. So what is the pulse? There's a few different definitions for this, guys. It doesn't matter which you say, really, but there's alternate expansion and contraction of an artery, but please refer back to an artery. Why is the wrist, temple or neck a suitable part to detect a pulse? The arteries are closest to the surface here. They're closest to the skin, the surface there. Okay. Now you're given here about the pulse rate, and you're asked what was the control in this investigation. Now some people might do the breathing rate. It varies. I do the pulse rate, so I'm going to continue on with the pulse rate. So the control, everybody, for this is a person at rest. And why is the purpose of this control? Well, the purpose of any control is for comparison. Now part 3 was unique and very tricky, actually. You're given a graph that you had to draw, and you're told that there was 2 women, same age. One woman, A, was a very fit athlete, and the other woman, B, was overweight and rarely took exercise. First, you had to appropriately label each of the axes below. And then you had to draw 2 curves to summarise your likely results of your investigation. Okay, which stating which is which. Okay, so time usually goes in the x-axis anyhow, so that's where I put time here. And on the y-axis, I put my rate of exercise, or intensity, or some form of exercise going on there. Maybe jumping jacks or running or something on those lines. So yeah, a lot of students didn't even get the axis titles correct. And then your two curves. Now you can see here that on the y-axis there, I have no beats per minute there. Okay, that we're measuring here. Okay, and you don't need to. Okay, but you should note that people who are overweight or unhealthy generally have a higher pulse rate than someone who is healthy. Okay, and when an unfit person exercises, their heart rate, their pulse rate increases rapidly. So you can see here I have two curves. Person A, I have a gentle slope, what I think is a gentle slope there of the rate of exercise on its pulse rate increasing, and then obviously I have it decreasing then because they've stopped exercising around this point over here, and it returns to normal. For the woman, person B, again, she started off as a higher beats per minute. The pulse rate was higher. It, again, was steeper. And it took her longer for her to return to normal for her resting pulse rate. IV, recovery time is a duration period following exercise in which the pulse rate returns to normal. Suggest how you might measure recovery time. So this is what you have to do. You have to immediately, and again the word immediately should be mentioned, after your exercise, start counting the pulse rate per minute. And keep on doing so until the resting rate, which you would have got at the very beginning, is reached. So a particularly good question. A lot of students tend to underestimate how complicated the pulse rate could be, so just to be careful with that one. Okay, we're almost done, and I particularly like this question here because I think it's my last question actually, because it talks about the circuits, talks about blood pressure and the pulse and diet and exercise. Okay, so give a name for each of these circuits. The pulmonary and systemic circuit there, everybody. Now, surprisingly, a lot of students actually got that one wrong. They said an open system and a closed system. And again, the clue really should be in the word system. Okay, open and closed systems got to do with different types of animals. So for instance, insects have an open system. Humans, mammals have a closed system. But the question read, the human circulatory system has two circuits. So the two circuits there are the pulmonary and the systemic circuit. Which of these circuits involves pumping blood by the left ventricle? So out the left ventricle, it goes into the aorta, and from there it goes all around the body. So that's the systemic circuit going on here. The pulmonary circuit is only interested in the pulmonary artery, the lungs, back to the pulmonary vein. Now, for B part I, you're asked to write a short note. Generally, when you're asked to write a short note, you could be looking up to 3 points, give or take. They're a little bit more precise now than they were before. So this is 2009. So you're asked to write a short note on each of those. Really, you're just going to define blood pressure and the pulse. So the pulse, as we said, is the alternate contraction expansion of an artery. Blood pressure is the pressure of blood on the artery wall. The second thing you're asked to do was comment on diet and exercise and how that can affect the circulatory system. Well, like if you have a high fat diet, you have a greater chance of a stroke, which is due to clogged arteries. And if you exercise, it helps to strengthen the heart, and it also decreases the likelihood of heart disease. Okay, next, they were fairly handy enough, those ones. Part 3, two ways, other than colour, in which red blood cells differ in either structure, composition, of typical body cell. So there's loads you could say for here. You could say red blood cells have no nucleus. Okay, now I have white blood cells here, but that should really be a body cell, so I'm going to change that now. Red blood cells have no nucleus, and body cells obviously have a nucleus. Body cells have no definite shape. Red blood cells are bioconcave shape. You could refer to hemoglobin there as well. Red blood cells have hemoglobin, body cells do not. Okay, next, IV. What is the role of the SA and the AV nodes in the heart? Okay, we referred to this already. SA node is the pacemaker. Generates an impulse which causes the atria to contract. The AV node generates an impulse which causes the ventricles to contract. The locations of those: the SA node is the top wall in the right atria, and the AV node is in the septum between the right atria and the right ventricle. That's really just learning off. Is that it? I think it is. Thank God, my voice is getting hoarse. So everybody, there's actually quite a lot in that, but the questions do become fairly repetitive, and practice makes perfect and all of that. So it's well worth doing these questions, and you can see that they do come up quite frequently, and they can be linked in with respiratory system, digestive systems, but you can also talk about the lymphatic system too, and excretionary system for that matter. So there is a few links there, other links that you could bring in. So look guys, I hope that helped, and all the best.